He sat tied to a wooden post, the skin on his neck and chin already covered with black spots, his lips trembling in a ragged rhythm as he breathed. From a distance, it seemed that he was still holding on, but up close, it was clear that his hands and feet were swollen, his fingers so swollen that his rings were cutting into his flesh, and his nails had darkened and begun to peel away. The smell, heavy, rotten, with a sweetish tinge of decaying flesh, hung around him like an invisible wall. No one dared to come too close. Only 2 guards, who took turns every few hours, stood motionless, turning away, trying not to breathe. Vlad, known as Țepeș, had spent the last few weeks not in battle, but in a cramped stone cell where almost no daylight penetrated. His capture was the result of betrayal, which was recorded dryly in the court records. He trusted promises without checking them. He believed he had come to negotiate with Hungarian allies, but found himself in the hands of those who were waiting for the right moment to get rid of him. The political situation was tense. Neighboring principalities were torn between supporting the Ottoman Empire and Christian rulers, and his name had become a symbol of both fear and ruthless power. That is why his fate was decided quietly, without loud announcements, but with careful calculation. The air in the cell was saturated with dampness and stench. The servants who were assigned to look after the prisoner later reported that in the first week of his imprisonment, deep ulcers appeared on his back and thighs. From lying on damp straw for so long, his skin cracked and a cloudy liquid oozed from the cracks. Local doctors, who were allowed to see him at the insistence of the Hungarian governor, limited themselves to primitive remedies, washing the wounds with wormwood infusion and applying compresses of crushed garlic and salt. Sometimes they tried to ease the suffering by bloodletting, hoping to purify the bad blood. But after each procedure, the condition worsened. The pulse became weaker, the lips turned pale, and the eyes began to dart about like those of a trapped animal. The testimony of one of the guards, found in archival records, describes how the prisoner called for a priest in his delirium. He whispered about terrible dreams in which his own victims, impaled on stakes, came to him with empty eye sockets and torn bellies, and accused him of being doomed to eternal flames. Rumors quickly spread throughout the camp, and many began to claim that Țepeș was already cursed, and that the devil was taking his soul. A priest was brought in, but the conversation did not last long. After attempting to hear his confession, he hurried away, citing an unclean spirit in the prisoner. The food brought to him remained untouched. His aversion to food was intensified by stomach pains and nausea, which he could not suppress. By the end of the second week of captivity, his face was emaciated, but his body below the waist was swollen, his skin was stretched, and purple swellings appeared in the groin area. The doctors rubbed them with a mixture of lard and vinegar, but this only intensified the inflammation. Rats crawled in the dark corners of the cell, attracted by the smell of decay, and the servants admitted that they had seen them creeping close to the bed at night. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of the fortress, his fate was already being discussed. The Hungarian council was torn between those who demanded his immediate execution and those who saw him as a valuable bargaining chip. Ottoman ambassadors conveyed the message that his death could be a pretext for war, while neighboring princes sent secret envoys offering gold or land for his head. However, illness and exhaustion began to work faster than politics. In the third week, he stopped getting up, and any movement caused a hoarse groan. In one of the reports sent to Brasov, they wrote, "His condition is such that he may not live to see the trial. His body emits such a stench that people cannot stand to be near him for more than a quarter of an hour." Despite this, the guards were reinforced, not for fear of escape, but to ensure that no one could secretly put an end to his suffering. 2 armed men stood guard around the cell day and night, and only the chief guard had the keys. By the end of the month, his delirium became constant. He talked to invisible people, sometimes laughing, sometimes screaming, as if fighting someone off. Blood oozed from his cracked lips. His breathing became labored, and his eyes, once sharp and alert, were now cloudy, as if covered with a film. Every morning, 2 servants entered the cell to change the bedding and remove the excrement, and each time they noticed that the smell was getting worse and the stains on his body were spreading. Rumors of his condition reached the local residents, and people began to gather at the walls of the fortress, some hoping to see the fall of the tyrant, others out of superstitious fear. Monks from a nearby monastery prayed for the cleansing of the land from the bloody hand, and old warriors who had once served him stood silently in the crowd, not daring to approach. The political intrigues surrounding his name continued unabated. Every day brought new letters, proposals, and threats. But Vlad himself had ceased to be a participant in these games. He lay in the darkness, between fever and oblivion, in a state of anticipation that grew heavier with each passing night. At the beginning of the second half of December, the cold intensified, and the stone walls of the cell began to exude dampness so thick that frost appeared on them. Vlad no longer got up. His body had turned into a motionless, heavy mass, and only his rare, wheezing breath reminded one that he was alive. The servants no longer changed his clothes completely. The once simple garments now clung to his body, soaked with pus, blood, and sweat. Any attempt to remove them caused such a cry of pain that the guards forbade anyone to touch the prisoner without their permission. The doctors, who were called to the cell every 2 or 3 days, already said openly that there was no hope. The tissue on his thighs and lower abdomen had begun to die. The skin in those areas had turned black with a wet sheen and gave off a smell of decay. During each examination, they cut off the dead pieces with knives and then cauterized the wounds with red-hot iron, hoping to stop the spread of rot. Even in his delirium, Vlad found the strength to curse them, to which they merely crossed themselves and continued their work. Sometimes, to muffle his cries, they gave him opium, but it plunged him into nightmares in which, according to one of the servants, he talked to the dead and asked them for advice. By that time, he could no longer digest food. He could swallow a few spoonfuls of broth, but an hour later, it all came back up. His body wasted away above the waist, but his stomach and thighs remained swollen, as if inflated. The skin on his hands became thin, his veins showed through, and dark stripes appeared on his fingernails, a sign that medical treatises called the Black Seal of imminent death. Intrigues continued around his imprisonment. One of the Hungarian advisors suggested secretly getting rid of the prisoner to avoid lengthy negotiations with neighbors. Opponents of this plan argued that it was better to wait until the disease took its course, so that the will of God could be blamed for his death, rather than people. Rumors about the prisoner's condition had already become a weapon. They were passed on to both allies and enemies, with details changed to suit the situation. The guards were changed more frequently. They complained of headaches, nausea, and weakness after spending several hours near his cell. One of them, according to testimony, lost consciousness when he saw a long white worm crawl out of a crack in his stomach. After that, the chief guard ordered the cell door to be kept open in the cold to dispel the stench, but this only accelerated the destruction of his body. A priest visited the cell several times. He brought a crucifix and read prayers, but each time Vlad turned away and muttered something under his breath. Once, in a rare moment of clarity, he demanded that a sword be brought to him so that he could drive away those standing at his bedside. When the priest asked who he was talking about, he described faceless people reaching out to him with bloody hands. After that, the monk refused to visit him anymore. In the camp, where his fate was being discussed, people began to fear that rumors of his painful condition might cause superstitious fear among the soldiers. Several young soldiers had already left their posts, citing the curse of the prisoner, but the court council decided not to rush. If he died of illness, it would relieve them of open responsibility, and the body could be passed off as a victim of divine judgment. In early January, his breathing became wheezy, and his lips turned blue. His eyes rarely opened, and even then his gaze was cloudy and unrecognizable. A yellowish liquid oozed from under his ribs, soaking into the fabric beneath him. The doctors no longer touched these areas. Any touch caused profuse bleeding that was impossible to stop. According to one of the guards, on the night before Epiphany, he screamed so loudly that he could be heard in the neighboring courtyard. When the guards burst in, they found him half-sitting, his eyes wide open, repeating that he had seen his old enemy standing behind the bars of a stone window, surrounded by burning people. Outside the fortress walls, preparations were already underway for the prisoner's death to signal political change. In Brasov and Sibiu, secret negotiations were underway between supporters of various heirs, while in the Ottoman Empire, ambassadors waited for news that would justify intervention in Wallachian affairs. But inside the fortress, time stood still, and each new day only reinforced the impression that the prisoner was already half in the grave. By mid-January, he could no longer tell day from night. The cell was in constant semi-darkness. The tiny window was covered with thick cloth to keep out the cold, and the only source of light was a tallow candle in an iron holder, which was lit only during inspections. Vlad lay motionless, with a bundle of old clothes under his head. His hair was matted, his skin had taken on a yellowish-gray hue, and deep dents appeared on his temples. From his neck down, he was covered with spots ranging from crimson to almost black. The doctors who examined him in the third week of January noted that the decay had spread to his internal tissues. There was a strong odor coming from his mouth, and his tongue was covered with a thick gray coating. His breathing became wheezy, with a gurgling sound, and each breath was labored. Lumps appeared around his leg joints and in his groin, which oozed pus mixed with blood when pressed. One of the doctor's students, unable to bear the sight, ran out of the cell and vomited in the corridor. The guards were already openly discussing that the prisoner would not survive the winter, but the court council waited stubbornly. The news of his death had to come at a convenient moment so that it could be used in negotiations. Ottoman ambassadors, who were nearby, sent secret notes to Hungary, claiming that the delay was an attempt to hide an unnatural death. Soon, access to the prisoner was restricted. Only 2 trusted guards and the senior physician were allowed to enter the cell. This was done not only out of fear of conspiracies, but also because the smell and appearance of the prisoner frightened even seasoned warriors. One of the guards mentioned in his report that at night he heard sounds from the cell that sounded like quiet whispers, even though Vlad was unconscious at the time. By the end of the month, the skin on his legs and lower abdomen had become loose, and when his bedding was changed, pieces of it came off. Realizing that he could not be saved, the doctors limited themselves to washing the wounds with warm water and chamomile infusion, and sprinkling them liberally with crushed charcoal to reduce the smell. But this only helped for a few hours. The frost outside the fortress walls gave way to a thaw, and the air in the cell became even heavier, with moisture seeping into the stone and fabric. At this time, political clouds were gathering around the fortress. Representatives of several contenders for power in Wallachia gathered in Brasov. Each of them demanded to be recognized as the legitimate ruler on the day of Țepeș's death. The Hungarian council, realizing that this could lead to a clash, tried to stall for time, but the prisoner's illness dictated its own terms. In early February, his condition became critical. He stopped responding to voices. His eyes remained open, but his gaze was empty and unmoving. His lips were cracked, and blood flowed from the corners of his mouth. His chest barely rose when he breathed. Doctors recognized that his heart was beating irregularly, sometimes stopping for several beats. For several nights in a row, he suddenly came to and began shouting the names of his enemies. He called them one by one, as if giving orders for their execution, and then fell silent. The servants on duty at the door later said that at these moments his face became the same as it had been during his reign, harsh and authoritative, but after a few seconds, the heavy mark of illness returned. By mid-February, the political pressure had become unbearable. A messenger arrived at the fortress from the Hungarian king with orders to prepare for the imminent news of the prisoner's end. This meant that Țepeș's death had to be made official, with an entry in the chronicles and witnesses, but his end was delayed, and every extra day added to the tension. On the night of February 21st, according to a guard, a deep, intermittent moan was heard in the cell. When they entered, Vlad was lying with his eyes half closed, his hands clenching and unclenching convulsively, and a thin trickle of blood flowing from his mouth. The doctor who examined him said that death could come within the next few days, but no one believed that it would be a quick and peaceful end. In the last days of February, Țepeș's cell became a place where even the guards entered with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. The prisoner's body was swollen unevenly. His chest and arms were emaciated to the bone, while his stomach and thighs remained distended, with soft areas that felt liquid when pressed. The skin on his legs began to peel off in large flakes, revealing pale yellow tissue oozing pus. His breathing became shallow, with long pauses, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. On the night of March 1st, his condition deteriorated sharply. The guard on duty at the door heard a sharp rattle and entered with the doctor. Vlad lay with his mouth wide open, his eyes rolled back, his body shaking with convulsions. Thick, dark blood flowed from his mouth and nose. The doctor tried to lift his head, but the convulsions only intensified. After a few minutes, everything stopped. He lay motionless, his head thrown back and his eyes open. An official death certificate was issued immediately, but the body was not touched until morning. When they tried to lift him, severe decomposition had set in. Fluid oozed from cracks in the skin, and the smell became so unbearable that the attendants covered their noses with their sleeves. Embalming had to be carried out directly in the fortress in order to send the body to Hungary for identification. Doctors scraped out the rotting tissue, treated it with wine vinegar, and sewed up the tears. Despite this, after a day, the body began to darken and emit an even stronger stench. Court reports from that time say that the Hungarian council got together the same day the news of the death reached Buda. The next day, messengers were sent to Brasov and Sibiu with orders to support the new ruler, who was loyal to the Hungarians. But the news didn't just make the Allies happy. The Ottoman Empire considered it an opportune moment to move its troops deep into Wallachia, explaining this as necessary to protect the people from civil strife. Chaos broke out in Wallachia itself. Several pretenders to the throne declared themselves the rightful heirs, and clashes broke out between their supporters in various cities. Former allies of Țepeș, fearing revenge, hastily left the country, or swore allegiance to their new masters. The servants who had cared for the prisoner in his final weeks scattered to the villages, telling stories of his agonizing death. Some said it was God's punishment for the blood of innocents, others that he had been ruined by the betrayal of those close to him. Memorial services were held in monasteries, but many priests refused to mention him by name, calling him the Prince of Darkness. The funeral was held without ceremony. The body, already in an advanced state of decomposition, was placed in a lead-lined coffin and sent to a secluded monastery. According to rumors, before the burial, the monks sealed the coffin with 3 iron locks, fearing that his spirit would return. Historians who have studied records from that time note that Țepeș's death changed the political map of the region. Wallachia lost its independence for several years, and the balance between the Hungarian court and the Ottoman Empire shifted in favor of the latter. However, he remained in the popular memory, not as a victim of foreign intrigues, but as a ruler whose life and death were marked by cruelty, and whose last days served as a reminder that no power can buy its way out of the decay of the body and the fear of judgment.